Hi, good afternoon, morning, weekend, evening, whatever it is over there, wherever you are. My name is Ada Bobineau, and I'm the founder and director of the San Antonio Black International Film Festival. And this is year 7 for us. We are running October 2nd through 5th to 2025. And what we do is we have a student matinee every year, and we bring in thought leaders that speak around our theme. So this year's theme is Action Vision. And I want to just bring this sister on because I was searching the internet and I found on LinkedIn Tunette Powell, and I'm like reading further, and it said disruptor, activist mom, and a storyteller. And I was just like, who is this woman? So I reached out to Tunette Powell. Welcome.
Yes, thanks for having me.
I reached out and found out that this sister is in San Antonio, Texas. How crazy is that? So I'm always attracted to disruptors. So that popped up, and I had to just find out more about you. So, who is Tunette Powell? Can you define yourself for us? Because I can read your bio and stuff, but I want to just talk it out here.
Right. I think, and I appreciate it. I'm so honored to be here with you. I think at the root, I am a storyteller and a truth teller. I think that those are the two things. And I would say, a lot of that for me started at a very young age. My father was incarcerated when I was about 5 years old for about half of my life. And that he always told me the truth, right? He never sugarcoated anything. He gave me truth, whether it was from a prison cell, writing me letters, or when we had visits, or when he was released. And so he told me very early on that I must be that same truth teller, that same storyteller. And so that kind of like shaped how I would live my life. So it got me in a lot of trouble in school when I was truth telling. But I would say that at the core, that's who I am.
Mm-hmm. So with that definition, that comes with a strong sense of self. So where does that come from? I mean, who was your big influences growing up in life, and who poured into your development?
Yeah, you had to go through a lot to get to this place. And I have
Yes,
no
you
doubt gone
do.
through a lot. Yes. And so I would say for me, some of the most influential people in my life, I would say from afar, it was definitely the work of Bell Hooks. Her work deeply informed a lot of my life. James Baldwin, right? Another truth teller and storyteller, like their work up close and in person. It was absolutely my mother, my father, and my grandmother on my mother's side. I would say the three of them had a lot to do with how I showed up in space. I feel like, as a young person growing up, getting into trouble, it would be easy to just, try to, beat it out of a child and say, don't be this way. But I felt like my parents did a really good job. Even with, incarceration being one of the big barriers, did a really good job of reminding me of who I was, of helping me through all of the mess and stress of life. And so those were some of my greatest influences. Today, it's my own children. I have a 16-year-old, a 14-year-old, and a 10-year-old, and they absolutely make sure that I'm walking it like I'm talking it, right? So cannot just be words for the sake of words, but they're making sure that I'm living the life that I declare I want to live.
Mm-hmm. So you were one of those kids, even you said you got in your share of trouble. But were you one of those kids who went to the library? Because you mentioned James Baldwin and Bell Hooks, and I was familiar with James Baldwin because that was my first Bale Street. If Bale Street Could Talk was my first book that I read by James Baldwin, and it just grew from there because I was just. But when did you get turned on to like they're heavy? Like when did you get?
A lot of the Baldwin stuff was a little bit older in my life in college. So I will say, like growing up, not in the library, but I did enjoy, things that were English based, in terms of language arts. I did always enjoy those sort of things, but we weren't really reading about those things early on. Even though I tended to go to all Black schools or, 99% Black and brown schools, those weren't really the texts that we were reading. It was really in college where, and I struggled in college. I'm like, all of education has been a journey for me. And still, I decided to keep going. But I will say that those were a lot of my college introductions. Once I read Yearning from Bell Hooks, I felt like my entire life had changed. Like, this is how I want to write. This is how I want to show up in space. This is how I want to reflect, right, on my lived experiences. And with, I would also say W.B. Du Bois. I feel like I could go on, Robin Kelly, that there have been so many influential people, but I was introduced to them in college. When I was a young person, all I wanted to do was play basketball outside. Like that was the thing. And I also knew what was right and wrong, right? Like what, when we need to speak up, even if it was adults that we had to push back against. And so that came really, like I would say, from my father, who told me that I had a duty to tell the truth. And so that didn't always make adults feel good, but I'm glad to say that that has carried me to this point.
So what has speaking up and exercising your voice taught you over the year? Like, do you have any memorable experiences you can share that speaking up on a particular topic or they got you in trouble, but you still stood your ground? I mean,
I have a bunch. Some I can't talk about legally, right? But I'll pull back. I'll start you. You know what? I'll start you when I was 3, right? And so when I was 3 years old, yes, I was expelled from preschool. And a lot of people were like, well, what did you do? Well, I spoke up. I was 3 years old. I was going to a Head Start program, and they had a program as well for my younger brother. And they weren't taking care of him properly. And my younger brother was, some months old. And so I told them that, right? I was like, y'all are not taking care of my brother the way that you should be. And they didn't like that feedback. So they told my mother that I wasn't able to come back to the program anymore. And, that was right here in San Antonio, Texas. Absolutely. My mother tells that story and has told it very often. Yes, 3 years old. And that's how it started for me, where it was, like they said, oh, she thinks that she's grown because she did speak up, right? And so I spoke up very early like that. And I have tons of examples all in between that. When I was in middle school, we had a long-term substitute teacher who was using profanity in the class. And nobody in the class wanted to speak up. And I was like, absolutely, we must. Right. And that didn't always go well. People don't like when or a young person exposing adults. And so I would say that would carry me right all over the years where even, and when I was in college at UCLA, we had to speak up. We were dealing with a lot of anti-Blackness in the housing. And rather than just accept it, we said, we're going to pull all the assistant vice chancellors together and have them listen to what we're saying, that we're not going to deal with the anti-Blackness in this housing. And when people initially refused to hear our voices, well, we showed up to meetings with our own agendas, right? Like we absolutely were disrupting spaces. And in the end, the assistant vice chancellors wanted to sit down, meet with us. A lot of practices and policies changed in the housing, from everything around how UCLA police interacted, right, with us. What, when other folks from all around the world were coming to the campus, what were some of the things they needed to be aware of and think of that were related to anti-Blackness? I mean, so on and so on, right? There were positions created to address these things. And so I feel like my entire life has been a story of speaking up, especially, you know what I mean? Like thinking about the experiences of other people who might not always be in a position to sacrifice. Because I have been in positions where I have lost money, right? I have lost other things amongst that from speaking out. And it's not always, popular or cute or sexy, but I've had to do those things because I knew that they were right.
It's just something in you then. I feel that I got to go back because this is Dr. Tunette Powell, y'all.
Yes.
She has the work behind the name here. But there seems to be a fine line with being a disruptor. And I say that because I've been in spaces where, I'm a speak upper too. I speak up, especially because I hate injustice. I hate when people aren't treating right. But I find that people do not speak up. They stay in their lane, they take it, and it just goes on. So there's a fine line. So for someone, when I think disruptor, I think someone who questions and challenges and engages in action to make necessary change. That's what I feel disruptor. So when you're a rebel with a cause, can you speak to how one should pick their battles to fight for equitable change, justice, inclusion, especially environments where people are in institutionalized settings? They're often chose to keep quiet and stay in their place.
Absolutely. And I will say, I was speaking to a group of young people recently, and I told them that, depending on what kind of situation you're in, it may call for something different, right? There are going to be moments where a protest makes sense. There are going to be other moments, right, where, figuring out who that person is and who is in charge is who I need to sit down with, right? There's going to be moments where it's a petition, or there's all these levels to what it looks like to make change. And so there is strategy, right? I think that's the most important thing, that sometimes, especially when we are still learning what it looks like to be a disruptor, and we know that we're passionate about something, we can show up and make a lot of mistakes, and it's okay. That's a part of the process. But I will say, just being very strategic. I think the biggest part of being a disruptor is that it's not an individual thing, that there is a collective thing, that it's much easier to speak up and speak out when you're not the only one, and when you have a partnership. So when I gave that example of UCLA, it was by no means just myself, right? There was Dr. Shamel Bell, who had previously worked with Black Lives Matter when it was called Justice for Trayvon Martin, right? There was Isaac Bryan, who is now, a politician, elected official in California. And so we had different folks who had different expertise and skills who could merge together. And I would say that when you are speaking up, think about what you're already good at. So when we were advocating at UCLA, they were like, okay, Tunette, you're a good speaker. My first degree was in speech communication. It was like, you're going to be the one speaking. For my friend, Dr. Shamel Bell, who had done lots of organizing, it was her idea to say, we're going to come with our own agendas, right? And here's how the agenda is going to look, ensuring that we have we're going to make sure that we have X amount of voices in the room and these people in the room, right? And it was Isaac, who is now an elected official in California, who were saying things like, all right, and we want to make sure that the right UCLA folks are in the room, right? And then we had other folks who were like, yeah, let's use the power of social media. So I would say just understanding, number one, what the issue is, right? And I think that that's incredibly important. And number two, forming a team of people, because sometimes you may have an idea and somebody say, that's not the right way to move, right? Like, we don't got to get arrested for every single thing that we do. And so there's ways to be a disruptor. Sometimes you absolutely must get arrested. Sometimes you got to be in the street, but just understanding that and making sure that that movement work doesn't become ego work, right? That it doesn't become reckless, that is very strategic, because at the end of the day, we're trying to disrupt systems. And that work is hard, it's long, and it can be very unhealthy if you don't have a team.
That is so true. I lost myself and came back. I'm sorry. So building on what we're speaking on, can you tell us about your career and the work you engage in across educational, nonprofit, and entertainment spaces, and how you even fell into this? Because you still have your independence. You choose, so I love that.
Absolutely. Some of these are like beautiful accidents. Just being part of the work, people knowing who you are, standing true to who you are, having some things, fall through. And so I would say that, I guess I should start with the piece around back to speaking up. Was in 2014, I was already doing stuff in education. I'd already been a published author, but I was very much not thinking about system level disruption. I was thinking if, every single child, right? I would go into schools and work with kids who schools were like, we can't do nothing with them. That's my favorite group. Boom, put me with them. And then here I was in 2014 doing all of this work, and I got a phone call that my oldest son, who was 4 at the time, was going to be suspended from school. And in the same month, right, I got called that my 3-year-old was going to be suspended from school. So I'm like, what's going on, right? Like, I have this whole rude awakening in my head, and you start off blaming yourself, right? Like, what could I do better as a parent? What are me and my husband doing? How can that be better? And the same year that happened, the U.S. Department of Education, which was very different than it is now, Obama was in office, and they had released data that showed that even though Black children made up 18% of preschool, they were accounting for half of all the suspensions. And that kind of shook up my world, right? It's like it's a stat that's unbelievable to me. But not only was it true for that time period, it had been true since desegregation, right? No surprise there. So I did what I could, right? I told you, what are you good at? What can you do? And so, yes, I was a speaker, but I also have been a writer, right? I started writing very early because my father was incarcerated, right? And then it turned into rhymes and lyrics and poetry and other things. So I knew how to write. So I decided to write about my experiences of having, young Black boys suspended from preschool. And about 2 months after I wrote a blog, CNN found that blog and they were like, we want to fly in tomorrow to interview you and your family about this experience. And it was like, whoa, and again, when you speak up, you're not going to get all the love that you hope you will. You might not get exactly what you want. You have to be willing to stick it through. You have to be willing to stand on the side of what's right, even when it's not popular.
Yes.
So CNN did the story. I spoke up, right? And oh my gosh, all the social media anti-Blackness, all of the emails telling me the worst things that you can imagine. Some I wouldn't even want to repeat, but the N-word was definitely one of the themes of the emails that I received, telling me that my kids were going to be in prison, that my baby daddy must be in jail, that I was on welfare. It was not anything like my life. It was just all anti-Blackness. And so, but on the other side of that, right? Because there's always multiple sides to things. So I had anti-Blackness coming at me from every direction, from all across the country. They had to stop comments right on the news article. But what ended up happening was Black parents from every part of the United States started reaching out to me saying, this is happening to me too.
Wow.
And that's what changed the game for me. Because at that point, it didn't matter who hated me. My story gave other parents permission to tell theirs, to speak up, to start to think about what does change look like right across the United States. And that made it worth it. That's what speaking up is about, right? That's how my journey unfolded, because then someone said, you need to go get a PhD and you need to tell these stories even more. Yes, because I'm being very honest, I didn't know what a PhD was. I only got my degree. I wanted to be the first woman in my family with a degree of any kind.
Right.
I wasn't trying to chase education dreams. I didn't love school, but somebody told me that a Black woman, and I said, okay, went to UCLA, got my PhD to tell the stories of Black parents across the United States who are dealing with the very same thing. And so my journey has been shaped by speaking up, by taking all of the anti-Blackness that comes with speaking up, because believe me, it will come. But knowing in your heart, in your soul, that when you speak up, it gives other people permission to do the same thing.
I'm like in the bad applaud. No, because it's so important. So what have you had to figure out about motherhood that was different from how you were raised and what motherhood has taught you? What has it taught you?
Yeah. Oh, so much. My goodness. Like, number one, it's thinking about, your kids as individuals, seeing them as beautiful individuals. The same way I said, whatever you're good at, that's what you got to use. Let that be your platform. So being able to hold that space for my kids, knowing it's not going to all be the same way. And just allowing them to express themselves in whatever that is. I have a middle son who is into filmmaking right now, and it's like, express yourself through that way. He might not get into all of the conversations that I think he should, but then he puts out a film like Resist, right? Where it's looking at police brutality and how Black communities resist against that, right? And so while he might not be at the dinner table engaging in conversations around police brutality, he's very much aware of it and using film to actually resist, right? And speak up. Where for my oldest son, his space is being able to travel the world, right? Because part of, this work is not, it doesn't all have to be heavy. It doesn't have to be hard. I think that there needs to be a possibility piece, right? Where we're thinking about what are the possibilities. So my Black boy, 16 years old, traveling the world, right? Like immersing himself across continents is something that is absolutely beautiful to me. My youngest son is loading, right? He's 10. And so I think just giving my kids permission to exist in the world in the ways that they see fit. And again, like always creating space for them to be able to speak up. I mean, that I have, tried to live that. And if I don't live that in a moment, it means they got to speak up at home too, right? So it can't just be if they won't be able to speak out in the world if they didn't get to speak up at home, right? If they didn't get to give you feedback and critique. And so I try to live that, and they hold me to that for sure.
So you're raising boys though. You're a woman. And so girls and boys are raised differently, I think. So, I know you feel that. Because I don't know how many are in your family. You said you had a brother. Is it just
so I grew up, I'm the only girl amongst 3 brothers.
Okay. Okay.
And I
Wow.
grew up as like the ultimate tomboy. And I feel like I didn't let my family put me in a box. So I feel like the way I grew up, I have to give credit. I don't know how my mother made it. But I feel like she did the best that she could to let me be. I'm sure that if she was to reflect, because we've had this conversation, she probably would have wanted, probably would have gave me a lot more, opportunity to push and be. And she tried to, rein me in because schools were like, up to a certain point. But absolutely, I do think that I was raised, especially for the time period that I was raised in, 90s, early 2000s. I really do believe that my mother was pushing against the ways in which young Black girls were raised. I feel like she gave me a lot of creative freedom to be myself. And I was able to like take that baton and do it even more so with my own kids.
Well, I know you heard that the whole thing, girls are raised, boys are loved. I know you heard that whole thing in terms of the difference in child rearing. So
I see it in the world.
Yes, yes.
Listen, I'm married to a man. I see it.
But what, as a mother who knows that, a mother who's raising 3 Black boys, what conscious revolutionary acts are necessary when raising Black boys to be free?
Yeah,
listen.
And
I know you feel, there's a difference. There's a difference between boys and girls, but
there is.
and I can't say who has it the hardest, because there's a lot of expectations on both parts and both sexes. But
absolutely,
what acts are necessary when raising, let's just say, children?
Absolutely. And I'll be transparent with you. I do feel, and again, there's an intersectionality of, race and gender at play here. So I recognize that.
Go ahead, bell hooks.
And still, right? And still we live in a society that accepts a lot of mediocrity from boys and men. And I think, so you can't like miss that patriarchal piece there that I try to make sure I hone in on, because I tell my boys all the time, like, y'all not going to grow up to be no mediocre men, right? Like it's not going to be enough. And so, just thinking about what all they bring and they contribute. I mean, all of my kids can cook, right? All of my kids can manage a bank account, right? Like my middle son spends a little too much money. We still in work on that. But all of them have like real skills and real contributions. Like they're not just coming because they're good looking, because they are, right? Because they're going to be protectors in in some made up sense. No. They have to have a high emotional intelligence. That's really, really important to me, right? Like, are you empathetic? Right? Do you ask people questions about themselves? Like, do you notice things? Do you notice the world around you? And so I'm real high on emotional intelligence. I feel like if my kids have emotional intelligence and they understand some of these basic things, being able to manage their money, being able to, like cook, know how to dress for an event, know how to treat someone else, right, in the world, and they're gonna be fine. But emotional intelligence is at the height of the work that I do with them. We spend a lot of time in community. I also let them see who I am, right? Like I have all these titles and I'm tired. I don't try to hide that because I don't want them to have a narrative of women are superheroes. No. We're tired, right? You got to step in. You got to do your part. Like it's got to be a real partnership. And so I'm very real about those things. I want them to see me as a whole person, not just a mother, right? Not just a caretaker, but like I'm a boss too, right? Like I'm all these things. And so I try to make sure that they see my full humanity, which I feel like will allow them to see the humanity of women out in the world.
Girl, I'm like, yes. No, it's so true. And I wish that there were, to a certain extent, there's no parenting classes.
None.
You have your babies, you do what you can, you do the best that you can. Some people don't do that and they give their kids away or, abuse them and whatever. But I think when you are in a position to birth a child and bring them into this world, you have a responsibility to do your best and to make sure that they grow up to be responsible, strong individuals that can survive without you.
I agree.
And that is so important. You know what? we are just living in just a crazy ass time right now, and
Woo.
so much confusion. There's so much erasure. There's so much lying and selfishness, not selflessness. And so, how is it that, I mean, what is it that you can recommend to kids? There's a lot coming at them. And then double that, because of the technology and social media, you're getting it constant. It's not like we could cut the TV off when we were growing up. It's constant. And so there's a lot of confusion out there for kids. I mean, and how do you what do you suggest to direct them to stay sane, to stay positive, to continue with their voice or use their voice for change and progression?
Yeah, it's tough, right? The social media piece, like I'm someone who um, l- uh, loves and recognizes the power of a social media platform. And also, right, everything is always at you all the time. And so my kids may know stuff before I know it, right? And young people, they see stuff right before it hits the news, because now we do have, right, social media that's, faster than any news segment could be. And so I think a couple things, right? Like, and here's one thing that I will say. And all of the work that, that I've done, what continues to lead in topics that young people want to talk about is mental health, stress, all of those things. Like, they've been leading. I don't know if it would have been leading when I was in school. I'm not sure. I felt like we didn't get asked the same line of questions. We were living in a very different world, but it's definitely leading today. And so I do think that, being able to have real open conversations about mental health and well-being and all of its aspects is incredibly important. I think that we need to normalize that in our homes, in our churches, or other sort of, spaces like that. I think we need to normalize it at our community and rec centers, right? Like, all the way around. It needs to be in our schools, normalized everywhere the young people are.
Mhm.
Also,
And go ahead,
oh,
please. Go ahead.
no, I was also going to say that I also think community is important, because we're living in such a strange time. And I've lost a lot of things this year due to this strange time. I've lost a lot of money because you can't do DEI, right? No diversity, equity, inclusion work. We have all these things at us. But the one thing that I realized that no administration can take from you, nobody can take from you, no boogeyman coming to get at you can take from you, is community. And so for young people to not be isolated, right? And we've gone through a lot that has created isolation. Because we have social media, maybe we don't need to hang out in person, right? Because of COVID, maybe we haven't recovered, right, from some of the separation that we've had. And so I think to actually be in community, in person with other young people is incredibly important. And an intergenerational community. And that's the last thing I'll say.
No, but the other thing is, I don't think people really get it like they should. But policy is an important area for oppression and racism, and that's what's being used now. Policy laws are being put in
It
place.
is.
The denial, the erasure, the denial, the assault on our history, the DEI,
Yes.
women's rights.
And it is like very real,
crazy.
because DEI is really just code word, right? Like, they're using the gaze of DEI to to employ all of the anti-blackness that they've always tried to employ. And it's like, when you see, I mean, 300,000 Black women, right, laid off in this, calendar year. How do you make sense of that? Right? Besides anti-blackness, right? And the intersectionality, right, of blackness and womanhood, and the direct attack on that. And so I think that it's incredibly important for us to be aware, right? We've always read about things. We've read about the Jim Crow laws, right? We've read about things like slavery. We've read about all of these things. And we continue to think that they're like in the past. But look at what's happening right now. Right. And look at who's being impacted of what's happening right now. And so when you look at everything across the board, whether it's the, anti-immigration laws, whether it's, anti-DEI laws, book bans, whether banning books by Toni Morrison and other greats, right? Like, if you look at what's happening right now, there is a direct attack on, Black and brown folks in ways that are very, that are echoing what we've seen in years past. And we have to stand up. We have to speak out. Or, right, like, we will go back to the 1960s, the 1950s, pre-Reconstruction, like we will. And I know it can seem, as a young person, it can seem like, no, because like I have all these things in front of me. But if we're not paying attention, right, I'm watching things be rolled back. I'm watching things be shaken up, where now, you can't even, if you speak out, you're fired, right? If you stand up for what's right, and I've been there and I've done that, right? I've had to sacrifice a lot of things to be to where I am now, but it's like, we must, because the moment that we get silent about these things, that's how those policies, right? How those ideas become policies, and those policies become the things that, you know what I mean? Like, or that actually dismantle all of the work and all of the fight that our ancestors, right, all the way to today have been putting in. So you're absolutely right. We are watching something unlike I've ever seen in my lifetime, right? I mean, we saw war on drugs era, right, which is intention, a lot of policies that were extremely anti-Black. Yeah. Well, right now, what we're seeing is anti-Blackness live, out loud, and in color.
What concerns me is, see, we're able to touch the civil rights movement. We're able to touch it. We're very close to that. We're one step away from our parents. But I feel that the kids nowadays, they have no touch to it. They have no mental connection other than maybe reading a book, or we've experienced that. And so what concerns me is, will they be able to handle for themselves being in positions that make America great again, that bullshit that he's feeling. And so that's just a concern. How will they be able to handle it with added technology? Because we didn't have technology. Boycotts were organized without technology.
Right.
Protests, everything was without technology.
Well, I will say this. I have faith and hope in young people. There are some young folks I'll uplift for sure. The name's Ayanna Bryant, who is out of Charlottesville, Virginia. She is now 24, but she first started organizing when she was 12, right? The Robert E. Lee statue was removed in Charlottesville because of her. And there are lots of young people like that. If we think about, the young people have lived through some things. So my kids alone have lived through the brutal murder of Trayvon Martin, right? Of George Floyd, of Breonna Taylor, right? Of, Sandra Bland. Like, there have been many that they have lived through. And I think that, when we think about, 2020 and the summer and that uprising, there were a lot of young folks on the front lines, right? When we think about some of the things that are happening with anti-immigration, with Gaza, like, we see that there are young people on the front lines. And when we see some of these attacks at our universities, we also see some of the young people on the front lines. I think what we have to do is we do have to make sure this social media piece is really interesting to me, because there are people who are really, really targeting and attacking young Black men in social media. So the gentleman who recently died, who
the one hung in Mississippi, the one hung in Mississippi.
Oh no, the white man who recently died, who's got a lot of attention. Who I will not say his name.
Yeah.
Yeah, I won't say his name on there. I know very well what his name is, but I won't speak it because he did not speak good things about Black people, particularly Black women. But I didn't even know who this, who this man was. Like, I was not familiar with him. But my kids, all three of them, 10, 14, 16, all knew who he was.
Wow.
And they knew him because of social media. And so then I asked some other folks at different varying ages. I have a brother who's 36. I asked my husband. None of us knew who he was. So for my kids to know who he is, they're targeting, right, young people of a certain age. And so we have to be intentional about what's happening in our social media spaces and how we're countering those narratives, because I think that, to me, that's where a lot of the issues that I see is that a lot of young Black men are under attack, and they're using social media to try to say, this is a good view, this is the right thing, this is how you need to think, this is how you need to act. They're trying to take away your masculinity, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I think that is the master's tool at work, and we have to be very intentional about naming that and disrupting that.
Girl, I can't wait until you come to our workshop.
I'm excited.
student matinee, October 2nd, teachers, professors, of course, at the RSPP to be there. But talk about that. What are you going to teach? What did you decide to teach in San Antonio here in the matinee? And how did you come up with
Yes.
the title and the interactive ways to reach young people?
Yes, we are going to have a good time. That's number one. So I'm in community with young people all the time. And I really think it needs to be fun, right? We're going to bring in, like, I'm a hip hop head. A lot of young folks, are also in hip hop. And I try to, like all the different, ages of hip hop from its, early traditions all the way to today. I respect and honor in all its ways. So we're going to infuse a lot of that hip hop. And the message really for me is just thinking about, you know what I mean? Like, what are you already good at? What do you already know? What do you already have? Right? It's that kind of that story of, the village that's trying to make a soup, right? And you bring this and you bring that. And once you bring all of that together, it becomes this stew, right? And so it's like, what is the stew for change? You know what I mean? It's going to be the visual artist, right? It's going to be, the reserved student who's a deep thinker, right? It's gonna be, the person like me who's gonna speak up, right? It's gonna be the athlete. It's gonna be, everybody in between. And so we're gonna have a real good gathering. We're gonna have some fun. We're gonna do some stuff with music that really allows us to get creative and express ourselves. And really the idea is young people being able to come into a space where they feel seen, heard, and valued, and to leave knowing that whatever skill you have, whatever gift that I believe and know that God has blessed you with, that is enough for you to change your community, to change your school, and to change this world, but only together, right? Like, this is a collective movement. And so it's going to embody a lot of fun, a lot of hip hop, and a lot of collectivism. That's going to be the message.
Awesome. Awesome. Any departing words of encouragement for young people, as well as anyone who needs affirmation and to do the right thing at this time?
Yes. I mean, in the words of Tupac, keep your head up. Keep your head up.
Oh, man. That's simple. That is simple and well understood, well said. Tunette, thank you. Thank you for this time. I know you have to rock and roll, got other things on your schedule. We look forward to seeing you. We're very pleased that you're a native San Antonian, native son, daughter. Yeah, keep it moving. Keep it going. We appreciate you. We need you.
Thank you.